Watch how psychological safety and real attention can unlock a shutdown mind faster than protocol, pressure, or perfect plans. Nobody in the known galaxy had ever made the Kethloran sovereign cry. Not war generals, not collapsing star systems, not even the time the Third Nebula Accord fell apart over a border dispute that lasted 600 years, but a 9-year-old girl, refusing to touch her food for 19 consecutive days, had somehow managed to do what entire armies could not. The Royal Medical Wing of the KIS Velshara, the most expensive, most fortified, most aggressively over-decorated vessel in the Kethloran Imperial Fleet, had become something that no amount of gold-plated hull plating or ceremonial banners could disguise. It had become, in every practical sense of the word, a disaster zone. Princess Valkyra, sole heir to the Kethloran throne, first daughter of Sovereign Melthara the Undying, future ruler of 11 star systems and approximately 42 billion living subjects, had decided, with the full conviction of a child who had recently discovered the power of no, that she was not going to eat. Not today, not yesterday, not the day before that, not for 19 days running, and the entire Kethloran medical establishment, for all its 5,000 years of accumulated biological science, had absolutely nothing to say about it except "we are trying, your sovereign," which was not, by any reasonable standard, a satisfying answer. Senior physician Ordak Weiss had been practicing Kethloran royal medicine for 43 years. He had treated radiation sickness, genetic fractures, 3 separate cases of temporal displacement illness, and once, memorably, a diplomat who had accidentally ingested a compound that made him believe he was a moon. He was not by nature a man who panicked. He was panicking now though, quietly, professionally, but panicking. "She will not open her mouth," he told High Commander Orinth Savo, in a tone that suggested this information was somehow the commander's fault. "We have presented the full spectrum of Kethloran nutritional options, traditional preparation, modern synthesis, everything approved by the Royal Dietary Council going back 4 generations. She looks at the tray, she looks at me, and then she looks away." Orinth Savo, who had once held a defensive line against a Vrethkai battlecruiser with nothing but a damaged fighter wing and a very bad attitude, said nothing for a moment. He simply stared at the physician with the specific expression of a man who was strongly reconsidering every choice that had led him to this point in his career. 19 days, he repeated. 19 days, Ordak Weiss confirmed, with the exhausted dignity of a man confirming his own execution. The timing, it had to be said, could not have been worse. The KIS Velshara was currently docked at Meridian Outpost 7, a mid-tier human space station orbiting a gas giant on the outer edge of the Tessavar cluster. The Kethloran delegation was here for the preliminary rounds of the Galactic Council Alliance Summit, a gathering that had taken 30 years of careful diplomatic threading to arrange. The Kethloran Empire joining the Galactic Council formally would shift the balance of power across 6 sectors: trade routes, military agreements, resource sharing, 17 separate sub-clauses regarding asteroid belt jurisdiction, all of it balanced, like a very expensive piece of crystal, on the continued goodwill of Sovereign Melthara. And Sovereign Melthara was not, at this precise moment, feeling particularly goodwillish. She was standing at the observation window of her daughter's chamber, watching Valkyra sit perfectly still on the edge of her sleeping platform, staring at nothing, with an untouched tray of food beside her. 37 alien doctors, nutritionists, and behavioral specialists had rotated through that room in 19 days. The galaxy's finest medical minds, the galaxy's most soothing voices, the galaxy's most carefully prepared delicacies from 14 separate star systems. Valkyra had not eaten a single bite. Outside, through the viewport, the lights of Meridian Outpost 7 blinked patiently in the dark. A very ordinary human station, doing very ordinary human things, entirely unaware that the fate of an interstellar alliance was quietly unraveling somewhere in its docking bay, one uneaten meal at a time. High Commander Orinth Savo was not a man who accepted the word impossible. He had, over the course of a distinguished 40-year military career, personally removed that word from 3 separate official Kethloran documents, replacing it each time with "not yet achieved." He believed in solutions. He believed in systems. He believed that every problem, no matter how complex, had a correct protocol, and that if you followed the correct protocol with enough discipline and enough resources, the problem would eventually surrender. The problem was not surrendering. He had started, as any reasonable Kethloran commander would, with tradition, the rite of first nourishment, an ancient royal ceremony involving hand-prepared broth from the sacred Velketh grain, administered in a specific sequence by a certified royal attendant, while a certified royal cantor recited the 12 verses of sustenance in the original Old Keth dialect. This ritual had been used to coax reluctant royal heirs into eating for over 2,000 years. It had historically a perfect record, Valkyra had sat through the entire ceremony with the polite, distant expression of someone enduring a very long and very boring presentation about tax restructuring. Then she had looked at the broth. The royal cantor had needed to sit down afterward. Ornansevo had then moved to phase 2, which involved rare delicacies sourced at considerable expense and considerable speed from 14 different star systems, crystallized moon fruit from the Pelavar rings, slow-processed protein spheres from the Drenish homeworld, fermented sky kelp from Aquan Station 9, honeyed spore clusters from the Mivath fungi forests, which had required a separate ship to transport because of their atmospheric sensitivity. Each dish had been prepared by a specialist. Each dish had been presented with ceremony. Each dish had been placed in front of Valkyra with the careful hope of people who were running out of careful hope. Each dish had gone back to the kitchen untouched. After that, Ornansevo had brought in the mind-calming specialists, 3 of them, from 3 different species, each carrying a different methodology. There was Counselor Brain Telik, a Solveth empath with 17 years of experience working with distressed royal children across 6 empires. There was Physician Lura Nasek, a Heliori practitioner of emotional resonance therapy, who could apparently detect the specific frequency of a child's distress and counteract it with harmonic vibration. And there was a very elderly Marin sage named Thos, who nobody had bothered to give a title to because he was simply Thos, and apparently that was enough. Brain Telik had spent 2 hours with Valkyra, and left looking shaken. Lura Nasek had managed 40 minutes before asking for water and a moment to herself. Thos had gone in, sat across from the princess for 6 minutes in complete silence, then walked out, looked at Ornansevo with ancient tired eyes and said, very quietly, "She is not broken, she is waiting." Then he had refused to elaborate and asked for a chair, which was, as far as strategic intelligence went, spectacularly unhelpful. Meanwhile, Sovereign Malthara had not left the observation corridor outside her daughter's chamber in 11 hours. She stood with the rigid posture of a ruler and the hollow eyes of a mother, watching Valkyra through the transparent partition. The princess sat on her sleeping platform, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the far wall with an expression that was entirely too old for her face. Malthara had conquered star systems. She had negotiated treaties that reshaped galactic borders. She had looked into the eyes of enemies who wanted her dead and had not blinked once. But watching her daughter sit there, small and still and unreachable, she found that all of her sovereignty and all of her power amounted to exactly nothing, and that more than anything else in her long and formidable life frightened her. Ornansevo approached her at the 14th hour, carrying a data tablet and the expression of a man delivering news he would very much prefer not to deliver. "The physicians say," he began carefully, "that if she does not take in some form of nutrition within the next 48 hours, they will need to discuss intervention options." Malthara did not turn from the window. "They will not touch her," she said. Her voice was very quiet. That was how you knew it was serious with Malthara. She got quieter, not louder. "Find another way." Ornansevo opened his mouth to explain, with great professional diplomacy, that there was no other way, that they had exhausted every available option, that the galaxy's finest minds had tried and failed, and that he was genuinely, honestly at a complete loss. And then the maintenance alert went off. It was a small alert, a routine one. A ventilation subpanel in Corridor 7B of the Royal Docking Wing had registered a pressure irregularity, and the station's automated system had dispatched the nearest available maintenance worker to investigate. Nobody on the Kethloran side had thought to flag Corridor 7B as a restricted zone on the station's internal grid. This was, in retrospect, an oversight. The door at the far end of the royal corridor slid open with a cheerful mechanical hiss, and through it walked a human male, approximately mid-40s, wearing a faded gray maintenance jumpsuit with the Meridian Outpost 7 logo on the chest pocket. He had a tool belt around his waist, a battered thermos in one hand, a canvas lunch bag hanging from the other, and the specific expression of a man who had been on shift for 9 hours, was not remotely done yet, and was very sincerely not in the mood for surprises. His name badge read, Red D. Calloway, Maintenance, Level 3. He looked at the corridor, which was significantly more gold-plated and ceremonially draped than any ventilation sub-panel corridor had any business being. He looked at the row of Kethloran royal guards who were staring at him with expressions ranging from alarm to outrage. He looked at High Commander Ornansevo, who had turned from the observation window and was now staring at him with the focused attention of a man trying to determine whether this was a threat or simply a very strange dream. Red looked down at the panel number on his work order. He looked back up at the corridor. 7B, he said. Nobody answered. He checked his tablet again. This is 7B, right? Ventilation irregularity? One of the royal guards made a sharp movement toward him. Ornansevo raised one hand and the guard stopped. The commander studied the human for a long moment. The human studied the commander back with the calm, unbothered patience of someone who had dealt with enough complicated situations on a space station to know that most of them resolved themselves if you just waited quietly. Inside the chamber, through the observation partition, Valkyra's head turned, very slightly, toward the door. It was the first time she had reacted to anything in 4 days. What happened next would later be described in 6 separate official Kethloran military reports, 2 diplomatic incident reviews, and 1 very confused memo from the Galactic Council's Protocol Division titled, with remarkable understatement, regarding unauthorized human entry into Royal Medical Space and subsequent events. The subsequent events, as it turned out, were quite something. Orinth Savo made a command decision. This was, technically speaking, not his call to make. The correct procedure would have been to have the human escorted out immediately, file a station complaint, and add review docking wing access permissions to his already catastrophically long list of things to handle. But the correct procedure had been failing for 19 days, and Orinth Savo had, somewhere around day 14, quietly begun to lose his faith in correct procedures. Also, Valkyra's head had turned. She had not turned her head for 4 days. Not for food, not for physicians, not for her mother's voice through the intercom. But a human in a gray jumpsuit with a lunch bag had apparently managed it without trying, without even knowing there was a head to turn. Orinth Savo was a military man. He understood the value of unexpected variables. He let the human stay, mostly out of curiosity, and partly because he was desperate enough to let the universe try something he had not thought of himself. He told the guards to stand down. He told Ordak Vase to stop making that noise. He opened the chamber door, and Red Calloway, who had located the ventilation sub-panel on the far wall of the room, walked in, fixed the pressure irregularity in approximately 4 minutes with a tool that looked like a modified wrench, made a small satisfied sound, wiped his hands on the side of his jumpsuit, and then stopped. Because there was a child in the room. She was sitting on the sleeping platform, knees pulled up, watching him with enormous silver-gray eyes that took up a disproportionate amount of her small face. Her skin had the faint luminescent quality of all Kethloran physiology, a soft blue-white that flickered very slightly when she breathed, like light through moving water. She was thin, too thin, if Red had known anything about Kethloran physiology, which he did not. To him she just looked like a kid who had not been sleeping well, with the specific hollow tiredness of someone carrying something too heavy for their size. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "Hey." She said nothing. He glanced around the room, which was enormous and gold and full of the kind of furniture that looked expensive enough to make a person nervous about breathing near it. Then he looked at the floor beside the sleeping platform, which was at least just floor. He walked over, sat down on it, put his back against the platform, stretched his legs out with the groan of a man whose knees had strong opinions about double shifts, and unzipped his canvas lunch bag. Outside the chamber, through the observation partition, approximately 14 Kethloran staff members watched this in total silence. Ordak Vase had pressed his hand over his mouth. 2 of the royal attendants were gripping each other's arms. Orinth Savo stood very still with his hands clasped behind his back, watching with the careful measuring attention he usually reserved for battlefield developments. Sovereign Male Thara had stepped forward until she was almost touching the partition glass. Inside the room, Red unscrewed his thermos. The smell hit the air immediately. Warm, sharp, a little sweet, faintly acidic. Tomato soup, made from actual tomatoes. Because Red Calloway had a very specific policy about not eating synthesized food on double shift days. He poured some into the thermos lid, which doubled as a cup, and then he unwrapped the second item from a square of foil, a grilled cheese sandwich, golden brown, slightly squashed from being in the bag, smelling of butter and melted cheese and something that had no scientific name but was essentially just the smell of a thing made with the intention of being comforting. Valkyra's nostrils moved. It was subtle, barely visible, but her nostrils moved. Red took a sip of his soup, then a bite of his sandwich. He chewed. He stared at the middle distance with the expression of a man who was thinking about absolutely nothing in particular, which was the specific mental state achievable only by people who had been on their feet for 9 consecutive hours and had finally briefly sat down. He did not look at her. This was, though he did not know it, the single most strategically effective thing anyone had done in 19 days. Every specialist, every physician, every counselor, every royal attendant who had come into this room had come in looking at Valkyra, watching her, waiting for her to respond, and a child who was already feeling like a problem to be solved does not eat when 14 pairs of eyes are measuring every breath she takes. She pulls further in. She goes quieter. She disappears into herself 1 careful inch at a time. Red was just eating his lunch. After about 2 minutes, Valkyra shifted. She uncurled, very slightly. Her feet came down from the platform. She tilted her head, looking at the thermos lid with the soup in it, then at the sandwich, then at the side of Red's face. He took another bite. She leaned forward, just a little. He reached into the bag, pulled out the second half of the sandwich, which he had wrapped separately because he had learned through long experience as a father that sandwiches were better when they had not been sitting against each other and going soggy, and he held it out to the side without turning his head. Casual, unhurried. The way you offer something to someone when you genuinely do not care whether they take it or not, which is paradoxically exactly the way to make someone want to take it. Grilled cheese, he said to the wall in front of him. Made it this morning. It's probably a bit cold now, but it's still good. Valkyra stared at the half sandwich suspended in the air beside her. Outside, Ordak Vase made a sound that was not quite a word. She leaned forward. Her head dipped toward the sandwich. She sniffed it, once, twice, with the focused intensity of a scientist encountering an unknown compound. The cheese, the butter, the bread, slightly charred at one edge because Red's portable cooktop ran a little hot on the left side. She pulled back, considered, leaned forward again, and then, with the slow, deliberate caution of someone doing something they were not entirely sure about, she took the sandwich from his hand and bit into the corner of it. The silence outside the chamber was so complete that when one of the royal attendants exhaled, it sounded like a weather event. Ordak Vase turned to Orinth Savo with an expression that had no medical terminology for it, because medical terminology had not anticipated this specific situation. Orinth Savo did not look back at him. He was watching the room, where a 9-year-old princess of the Kethloran Empire was sitting on the edge of her sleeping platform, chewing slowly, holding a slightly cold grilled cheese sandwich, while a human janitor ate his soup and said nothing at all. Sovereign Melthara had both hands pressed flat against the partition glass now. Her daughter was eating. For the first time in 19 days her daughter was eating. She did not make a sound. She was the sovereign. She did not make sounds in front of her staff. But her eyes, silver gray and ancient and fierce, filled with something that had nothing to do with sovereignty and everything to do with the fact that she was, underneath every title and every crown and every carefully maintained layer of imperial composure, simply a mother watching her child eat. Outside, nobody spoke, nobody moved, nobody breathed too loudly. Inside, Red Calloway finished his soup and started on his half of the sandwich. The universe, to its credit, had the good sense to stay quiet and let it happen. She ate 4 bites. Exactly 4. Small ones, careful ones. The kind of bites that said, I am not committing to this fully yet, I am simply gathering information. But 4 bites was 4 more than anyone had managed in 19 days, so the collective medical and diplomatic establishment of the Kethloran Empire was prepared to call it a miracle and file the paperwork accordingly. Red did not react. He did not look over with encouragement. He did not smile the specific wide, careful smile of an adult who has achieved something with a child and wants credit for it. He just kept eating, finished his soup, folded the foil from his sandwich into a neat square out of habit, and tucked it back into his bag, because littering, even on a gold-plated alien warship, was not something Red Calloway did. Then he said, still looking at the wall, "You want the rest of the soup? There's about half a thermos left. It's tomato. Nothing weird in it. Just tomatoes, a bit of cream, some black pepper." Valkyra looked at the thermos, then at him. "What is tomato?" she asked. Her voice was small and careful, like something that had not been used in a while and was not sure of its footing. But it was there. It was a voice. It was a question. In the observation corridor, Orinth Savo's hand tightened around his own wrist, which was the closest he came to an emotional reaction in professional settings. Red turned his head and looked at her for the first time since he had sat down, directly, plainly, with the uncomplicated attention of someone who had just been asked a reasonable question and intended to answer it. "It's a fruit," he said. "Grows on a vine. Red, kind of round, tastes sour if you eat it raw, but if you cook it down with a bit of salt and heat it turns into something completely different. Better. That happens with a lot of things actually." Valkyra processed this. "A fruit that becomes better when it suffers," she said. Red blinked. Then he let out a short, genuine laugh. "The kind that comes out before you have time to decide whether to let it." "Yeah," he said. "I guess that's one way to put it." Something in the princess shifted. It was small, nearly invisible, but it was there. The line of her shoulders dropped, maybe half an inch. The carefully maintained blankness in her expression cracked, just slightly at the edges. She accepted the thermos lid with both hands, the formal Kethloran way of receiving something offered, though Red did not know that and would not have changed anything if he had. She took a small sip, her eyes went slightly wide. "It is warm," she said, with the faint surprise of someone who had forgotten that things could be warm. "That's kind of the whole point," Red said. He leaned back against the sleeping platform again, comfortable, unhurried. Somewhere in the station beyond, his chem would be showing 3 missed check-in pings from his supervisor. But that was a problem for later. Right now he was sitting down, which was already an improvement on the last 9 hours. "You live here?" he asked. "On this ship? I live on Kethlor," she said. "The 7th planet of the Venshari system. This ship is temporary. Big ship for temporary," he said. "Everything my mother does is large," Valkyra said. There was something in her tone, not quite bitterness, not quite sadness, something that lived in the space between the two. Red nodded, the way you nod when you recognize a feeling someone is carrying without needing to be told the full story. "My daughter says the same thing about me," he said. "I coach her football team on weekends. She says I make everything a bigger deal than it needs to be." He paused. "She's probably right." Valkyra looked at him with focused curiosity. "You have a daughter?" "Nadia. She's 8. Looks exactly like her mother, which is either a blessing or a warning, depending on the day." He said it warmly, the way people talk about the things that are the most important to them, without fanfare, without decoration, just warmth. Something moved across Valkyra's face that was very close to the beginning of a smile. "Does she eat?" she asked. Red stared at her. Does she eat?" He let out another laugh, a fuller one this time. "She eats everything. Everything. I made the mistake of introducing her to cheese bread when she was 5, and now I cannot make it fast enough. She would eat the entire loaf if I let her." Valkyra looked down at the half sandwich still in her hand. Then she took another bite. A 5th bite. A real one. "What is she like?" she asked, still chewing, with the careful nonchalance of a child asking a question that matters more than they want to admit. And Red talked. He talked about Nadia's habit of narrating everything she did like a sports commentator. He talked about the time she had reorganized his entire tool chest by color rather than function, and how it had taken him 3 weeks to find his socket wrench. He talked about how she cried at documentaries about migrating birds but refused to cry at anything else on principle, because she had decided at age 6 that birds deserved more sympathy than most situations, and had not revisited this position since. He talked like a father. Easy, unhurried, a little proud, a little exasperated, completely in love with the subject matter. Valkyra listened with both hands around the thermos lid and the sandwich gradually disappearing bite by careful bite. Her eyes, which had been flat and distant for 19 days, were tracking, alive, following him. In the observation corridor, Sovereign Malthora had not moved from the partition glass. Orinth Savo stood beside her, data tablet forgotten at his side, watching the surveillance feed with the expression of a man whose entire understanding of crisis management was being quietly and thoroughly dismantled. "Who is he?" Malthora said. "Maintenance worker," Orinth Savo answered. "Level 3. His name is Red Calloway. He has worked on this station for 11 years. His record shows no disciplinary issues, no security flags. He has a daughter. She is 8 years old. He coaches her sports team on weekends." Malthara was quiet for a moment. "He does not know who Valkyra is." "No, Sovereign. He has no idea." She watched her daughter lean forward and ask Red another question about Nadia. Her thin hands wrapped around the thermos lid, the sandwich almost entirely gone. She watched Red answer without ceremony, without performance, without the careful, deliberate gentleness of someone trying to reach a difficult child. He was just talking, just a tired man on a lunch break, talking to a kid. "He is not trying to fix her," Malthara said quietly. Orinth Savo said nothing, because there was nothing useful to add. "He is simply with her." It sounded simple when she said it. It was the simplest thing in the world, in fact. It was also, apparently, the one thing that 19 days and the galaxy's finest minds had entirely failed to provide. The Sovereign of 11-star systems stood at the observation glass and watched a human janitor finish his lunch break, while her daughter, for the first time in 3 weeks, sat beside another living being and did not look like she was disappearing. It was Valkyra herself who told him, not intentionally. It came out the way things come out with children, sideways tucked inside something else, said without the awareness that it was the kind of information that changed the temperature of a room. They had been talking about Nadia's football team, and whether the offsides rule was genuinely necessary, or simply invented to make referees feel important, when Valkyra said, with the casual confidence of someone stating something obvious, "When I am sovereign, I will decide which rules have purpose and which rules exist only to give small people authority over large situations." Red stopped mid-sentence. He turned his head slowly and looked at her, really looked at her. The luminescent skin, the silver-gray eyes, the sleeping platform that was, now that he was giving it proper attention, made of something that was definitely not standard-issue station furniture and was possibly worth more than his apartment building. The room, the guards he had clocked outside through the doorway, The complete absence of anyone else in this very large, very gold, very serious space except for one small girl and one very confused janitor. When you are sovereign, he repeated. Of the Kethloran Empire, she said, taking a small sip of the remaining soup. I am the first daughter of Malthara. Currently I am the Princess Valkyra, but the title shifts upon ascension, so technically, she paused, reading his expression, which had moved through several distinct phases and was currently somewhere between oh no and oh absolutely not. You did not know. I did not know, Red confirmed, in the voice of a man watching his life reorganize itself at speed. You thought I was an ordinary child. I thought you were an ordinary child, he agreed. Valkyra considered this. Nobody has thought that in a very long time, she said, and she did not sound upset about it. She sounded, very quietly, like she had been waiting for someone to think it. Red did not have time to process the full weight of that sentence because the door opened. High Commander Orinth Salvo entered the room with the precise, measured stride of someone who had been waiting for the correct moment and had decided the correct moment was now. He was, in full formal uniform, approximately the most intimidating thing Red had ever been in a room with, and Red had once been on shift during a coolant pressure failure that had taken out 3 decks. He stopped in front of Red. He looked down. Red looked up. Red Calloway, Orinth Salvo said, in the tone of a man reading charges. Level 3 maintenance worker. Meridian Outpost 7. That's me, Red said. His voice held up reasonably well, all things considered. You entered a restricted royal chamber. The panel number matched my work order, Red said. With respect, sir. Someone should have flagged the corridor. Orinth Salvo's expression shifted approximately 1 millimeter, which for Orinth Salvo was the equivalent of anyone else wincing, because the human was, frustratingly, correct. You interacted with the royal princess without authorization. She was sitting right there, Red said. I said, hey. I didn't think that required paperwork. You fed her. And here, finally, Red Calloway's composure developed a crack. He stood up, slowly, because his knees still had opinions, and he looked at Orinth Salvo with the expression of a man beginning to understand the full scope of what he had stumbled into. The sweat was already starting at his collar. I offered her half my sandwich, he said carefully. It was grilled cheese. I make it myself. It is bread, and processed dairy, and I am very sorry. I did not know she was. I would never have. The sandwich is completely harmless. I eat it every day. My daughter eats it. It is not exactly a royal. It is just, I am so sorry. He was by the end of this sweating comprehensively through his jumpsuit. Orinth Salvo opened his mouth. He did not get to use it, because the room's secondary entrance, the one that connected directly to the sovereign's private corridor, the one that had not opened once in the 19 days they had been docked at this station, opened. Sovereign Malthara walked in. Every person in the room, Orinth Salvo included, straightened immediately, instinctively, the way all living things straighten when something significantly more powerful than them enters their immediate space. She was tall, taller than any human Red had ever stood near, with the same luminescent quality as her daughter but stronger, steadier, like light through still water instead of moving. She wore no ceremonial dress. She had come directly from the observation corridor. She looked, despite being the ruler of 11-star systems, like someone who had been standing very still for a very long time and had finally decided to move. She stopped in front of Red. He was, at this point, sweating through the logo on his chest pocket. Your sandwich, she said. Her voice was low even, carrying the particular weight of someone who had spent decades making rooms listen. The processed dairy and bread. Her eyes moved to Valkyra, who was sitting with the empty thermos lid in her hands, watching her mother with an expression that was equal parts wariness and something softer. Then back to Red. It was the first thing she has eaten in 19 days. Red opened his mouth, closed it. Malthara reached out, and with one hand, placed it briefly on his shoulder. A deliberate gesture, a formal one. Her eyes, ancient and silver and exhausted in the way that only parents who have been frightened for their children get exhausted, looked directly into his. Thank you, she said, just that. No title attached to him. No ceremony around it. She said it the way Red had offered the sandwich, plain and direct and real. Behind her, Orinth Salvo was staring at the wall with the focused intensity of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew about crisis resolution, and Valkyra, sitting on her platform with her empty thermos lid, looked at her mother, then at Red, and finished the last corner of the grilled cheese sandwich. It came out slowly, the way true things usually do. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic confession, but in pieces, careful and uneven, like someone dismantling a wall they built themselves and are not entirely sure they want gone. Red had asked her, somewhere between the discussion of offsides rules and the revelation that had nearly stopped his heart, A very simple question. He had not planned it. He had not constructed it with therapeutic intent or diplomatic strategy. He had just looked at her, this small, serious, hollow-eyed child sitting in the middle of an enormous golden room full of untouched food, and said, "So what do you actually want?" Like if nobody was watching and nothing was on the line. "What do you want?" Valkyra had stared at him for a long time, as though the question were in a language she recognized but had not spoken in years. Then she had told him, quietly, in pieces. Now, with her mother standing in the room, she told her too. She was frightened of the summit, not in the way that people expected her to be frightened, not of the crowds or the foreign dignitaries or the formality of the proceedings. She was frightened because she had been told repeatedly, carefully, by tutors and advisors and protocol specialists, exactly what she was expected to represent at this summit, what she was expected to symbolize, the future of the empire, the continuity of the Kethloran line, the living proof that the dynasty was stable, strong, unbroken, worth allying with. She had been told what she was for. Nobody had asked her what she thought, not once, not in the weeks of preparation, not in the briefings, not in the fittings for the ceremonial dress she was expected to wear while standing beside her mother in front of the Galactic Council. She had sat through 17 preparatory meetings and had not been spoken to directly in a single one of them. She had been spoken about, referred to, indicated. The princess will stand here. The princess will be visible during the third address. The princess represents the unbroken succession. Always third person. Always the princess, never Valkyra, never just her, and she had not known how to say any of this. She did not have the words for it, or rather she had the words but no container to put them in, because everyone around her was so large and so certain and so busy managing the weight of an alliance that would reshape 6 sectors that there was simply no space in any room she entered for a 9-year-old to say, "I am scared and I do not want to be a symbol, I want to be a person." So she had stopped eating. Not as a strategy, not as a protest exactly. More the way a body stops doing things when a person has run out of ways to be heard. It was the only language left that anyone seemed to notice. Red had listened to the parts she told him with the straightforward, undramatic attention of someone who was not surprised that a child felt overlooked, because children got overlooked constantly, and it was one of the more persistent failures of adults across every species apparently. Then he had said, "Yeah, that sounds exhausting. I'm sorry nobody asked." 5 words. "I'm sorry nobody asked." No solution attached, no immediate pivot to fixing it, just acknowledgement, plain and direct, that something had been missed and that the missing of it was worth being sorry about. It had, inexplicably, been exactly enough. Now Valkyra said all of it again to her mother, in the careful halting way of someone who has rehearsed the feeling but not the speech, and Malthara listened. She did not interrupt. She did not reach immediately for reassurance or explanation or the 1,000 reasonable justifications that existed for why the summit preparations had gone the way they had. She stood very still, and she listened to her daughter describe the experience of being in every room and present in none of them, and with every sentence the sovereign's expression shifted, slowly, from the controlled composure of a ruler into something much older and much more complicated. When Valkyra finished, the room was quiet. Orenth Savo was looking at the floor with the focused attention of a man reviewing in real time every meeting, every briefing, every preparatory session, and counting with growing discomfort how many times the princess had been in the room and how many times anyone had looked at her directly and said, "What do you think?" He was not arriving at a comfortable number. Malthara was silent for a long time. The particular silence of someone who has been handed a truth they cannot argue with and are deciding what to do with the weight of it. Her eyes stayed on her daughter. Valkyra looked back at her, braced in the way children brace when they have said the true thing and are waiting to find out whether the true thing was allowed. Then Malthara sat down, on the floor beside the sleeping platform in her full sovereign bearing, without ceremony or hesitation, right next to where Red had been sitting, and she said very quietly, "Tell me what you want, not what you represent, what you, Valkyra, want." In the corner of the room, Red Calloway stood very still and looked at the ceiling, because some moments do not belong to the person who accidentally started them. The official Galactic Council incident report, filed 11 days after the events in Chamber 7B of the Royal Docking Wing, was 43 pages long. This was notable because most incident reports ran between 3 and 7 pages. The extra 36 pages existed because nobody on the Council's documentation committee could agree on how to categorize what had happened. And when bureaucrats cannot agree on categorization, they write more pages. It is a universal constant apparently across all known species. The report's final summary, after 43 pages of careful, tortured diplomatic language, concluded that a spontaneous human emotional intervention of undetermined methodology had produced a measurable positive outcome in a Category 4 diplomatic health crisis. which was, as descriptions went, the most aggressively boring possible way to say that a janitor with a thermos had done what the galaxy's finest minds could not. Word spread. Because word always spreads, especially when it is the kind of word that makes everyone feel slightly embarrassed in different directions. The Heliori delegation heard about it first and spent 2 days debating whether the grilled cheese sandwich constituted a form of resonance therapy they had simply not documented yet. The Solveth empaths requested a full chemical analysis of processed dairy, convinced there was an emotional compound they had missed. The Marin sage Thos, when informed of how events had resolved, said only, the child was waiting for someone to sit down, and then refused to discuss it further, because Thos had made his point on day one and was not in the business of repeating himself. The Galactic Council, for its part, did what governing bodies always do when confronted with something they do not understand. They formed a subcommittee. The subcommittee's mandate was to investigate what they were now formally calling human intuitive engagement capability, which was an impressive title for talking to a kid like she was a person, but the subcommittee had a budget to justify, so impressive titles were necessary. High Commander Orinth Savo filed his own report separately, through military channels, because he was not the kind of man who let significant strategic observations disappear into council bureaucracy. His report was 6 pages, single-spaced, and written with the precise, unadorned clarity of someone who had spent 40 years saying exactly what he meant. It documented the failure of every conventional protocol. It documented the arrival of the maintenance worker. It documented in specific detail every observable change in the princess from the moment Red Calloway sat down on the floor and stopped trying. The conclusion of Orinth Savo's report read, the human did not attempt to solve the problem. He made the problem feel that it did not need to be solved. This distinction appears to be significant. Further study is recommended. It is this commander's position that humans possess an emotional operational capability that has been systematically underestimated by Kethloran's strategic assessment. This assessment should be revised. This was, coming from Orinth Savo, roughly equivalent to anyone else writing 1,000 words of breathless admiration. His staff read it twice just to make sure they had understood it correctly. Sovereign Malthara's response was more direct. Because Malthara had always preferred directness to paperwork, she requested through the station commander that Red Calloway be formally assigned to the Kethloran royal delegation for the duration of the summit as a cultural liaison and companion to Princess Valkyra. The request carried the full weight of a Kethloran imperial sovereign's personal endorsement, which meant it was in practical terms not really a request. So the station commander delivered this news to Red during his next shift. Red was fixing a water recycler at the time. He set down his wrench. He looked at the station commander. He looked at the water recycler, which still needed fixing. He looked back at the station commander. I have 14 open maintenance tickets, he said. Someone else will cover them. The station commander said, in the tone of a man who had already been on the comm with people considerably more powerful than both of them and had lost every argument he had attempted. I am a janitor, Red said. You are as of this morning also a cultural liaison to the Kethloran royal delegation, the station commander said. There is paperwork, I am sorry. Red picked up his wrench, finished the water recycler, because the water recycler still needed fixing regardless of what the galaxy had decided about his career trajectory, and then he went and found Valkyra. She was in the royal common room with a data tablet, reading something. She looked up when he walked in, and the corners of her mouth moved in the way they had started moving over the last several days. Not quite a smile yet, but the architecture of one. The early framework of something that might become a smile if given sufficient time and sufficient grilled cheese sandwiches. They told you, she said. They told me, he confirmed. He sat down across from her, with the same unhurried ease he had brought to the floor of her chamber 11 days ago. You know anything about this? Valkyra looked back at her tablet with the carefully maintained innocence of a child who had, in a private conversation with her mother 3 days prior, mentioned that she found the human's company preferable to that of any of the official cultural liaisons, and that she would very much like to continue their discussions about Nadia's football team and the deeper philosophical implications of tomato soup. I may have expressed a preference, she said. Red looked at the ceiling, then at the small, luminescent, entirely too composed 9-year-old sitting across from him, then at the ceiling again. Your mother runs 11-star systems, he said. 12 after the summit, Valkyra corrected without looking up from her tablet. Right, Red said. 12. The Alliance summit proceeded, as it turned out, without incident. Valkyra stood beside her mother during the third address as planned. She wore the ceremonial dress as planned, but Malthara had also, quietly, and without announcing it to the protocol division, made one change to the schedule. During the informal reception on the summit's second evening, She had introduced her daughter to the council delegates not as the princess or the first daughter, or the living proof of dynastic continuity, but simply as Valkyra, and had then stepped back and let her daughter speak for herself. Valkyra had, apparently, quite a lot to say. The delegates had found her to a one completely riveting. The Galactic Council formally welcomed the Kethloran Empire into the Alliance on the summit's final day, and if the signing ceremony ran slightly longer than scheduled because the princess had follow-up questions about 3 of the sub-clauses regarding asteroid belt jurisdiction, well, the Protocol Division added it to the report, page 44. And so to summarize, the Kethloran Empire joined the Galactic Council, 6 sectors were diplomatically stabilized, 30 years of careful threading held, 42 billion Kethloran subjects gained the protections and trade benefits of Council membership, an interstellar alliance that reshaped the political architecture of the known galaxy was secured, formalized and signed, because a 9-year-old girl was scared and hungry, and nobody had thought to sit down next to her, because a tired man on a double shift had a thermos of tomato soup and half a grilled cheese sandwich and absolutely no idea who he was talking to, because apparently, across every star system and every species and every sophisticated civilization that had ever pointed itself at the sky and called itself advanced, the things that reach people when nothing else can are almost never complicated. They are warm, they are unhurried, they ask what you actually want, and then they wait, without performance for the answer. The Galactic Council Subcommittee on Human Intuitive Engagement Capability published their findings 14 months later. The report was 212 pages long. Its central conclusion, buried on page 167, read, "Humans appear to possess a natural capacity for uncomplicated presence that functions in emotionally complex situations as a form of advanced intervention." Red Calloway, when this was read to him, said, "I just offered her my lunch." The subcommittee added this to the appendix, as supporting evidence. Somewhere on Meridian Outpost 7, the water recycler he had fixed that morning was running perfectly. Nobody knew it was connected to any of this. It was not. But it worked, and the water was clean, and sometimes that is exactly enough. This is what the galaxy forgot. Children don't shut down because they're difficult. They shut down when they feel like a problem, not a person. Real attention, calm presence, and one honest question can do what protocols can't: restore trust. And trust is where eating, talking, and living start again.